Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week, why there's no Art of Tempus and what your character can do about it. Time travel stories are scarce in mythic Europe. They're a mainstay of our genre fiction now, but they were revolutionary when, in the late 19th century, they became popular. Folklore does allow a limited form of time travel in that the fairy-led can be led far from home for centuries, effectively moving forward in time without aging. There isn't, however, a genre where people are allowed to go backward in time. This is less strange than it appears when you remember that in medieval literature, things are not that much different in the past. When Julius Caesar is described in some sources, he is a medieval king, and his soldiers are medieval knights. There's little interest in going back in time because going back is much like travelling to another country in the now. Time travel isn't needed because ghost stories and stories of strange, distant lands fulfill the same narrative need. So what do we do if we want them anyway? What did medieval people think that time was? Let's consider the absence of an Art of Tempus. In Aristotle's view, which was followed by Aquinas, time is not a thing. Time is what you see when you count the processes of things happening one after another. As such, time is perceived. Before humans were around to watch things, there was, according to Aristotle, no time because there was no one to act as the observer. Things happened, but lacking in enumeration, there was no time. Aquinas, being a Christian, had an omniscient observer available. Time occurs because God does stuff to begin creation. The first day of creation is literally the first day. Time is surrounded by eternity, which is effectively timeless. Again, things happen prior to creation, prior to people, but they don't matter, so there's no real time. Time is, then, the observer noticing motion. This means that time is perceived, not merely abstract. In the 14th century, some thinkers suggest this is mistaken, that there can be time without motion or without observers, but that's after the standard game period. No noun, no form, no form, no art, no spells. So the first thing we could do is declare Aquinas to be wrong. One way out of this is to say that time does not work in the way suggested by Aristotle. In the Creaman philosophy, for example, order descends into chaos, and this creates an energy differential, which can be used by magi to fuel spells. The motions in the field of Vim that circles the earth are literally the clockwork of the universe winding down into utter chaos. This means that manipulating time is the art of Vim. When you misuse the magical field of energy, reality drops you outside in twilight and even alters you so that you won't keep breaking the underlying structure of the universe. Twilight points are, therefore, the perfect penalty for people who damage time. As an example, in one of my earliest online games, we got around the slow signalling rate of email gaming by having the players simultaneously play 3 stories. The player had the same magus in each story at different points in their life, and if they did things in the chronologically earlier stories, which could not fit into the continuity of the later stories, then the later characters earned twilight points. As a reminder, one-way travel is easy. Fairies have the ability to store people for a prolonged period, so they move forward in time. Similarly, certain regios have dilated time so that a person living in one ages very slowly and experiences time very slowly compared to the outside world, effectively allowing travel. Some spells turn a person into an unaging material object, and they resume their life if the object remains undamaged until the spell's duration ends. The trick isn't moving forward in time, it's returning to the present. So how can that be done? To state the obvious, God gets to cheat. This is how things like prophetic visions occur. God just shows people a bit of what he can see in his extratemporal position. Note there is a deep school of medieval philosophy here about what exactly God knows of the future, whether it is an impossible limit to his omniscience for him to not know everything, and if he already knows everything, does this mean that humans effectively have no free will because God created the foundational state of the universe? There are various answers to these questions, which we won't dwell on here, but can make for interesting play if your character is a holy magus. Demons can't affect the past because they're unable to plan. As purely reactive creatures, they aren't able to decide to travel into the past as part of an elaborate scheme because they can't delay their gratification in this way. Fairies cannot, so far as we know, send a character back in time. They can, however, flawlessly portray imitations of historical times, and this means that a character who has gone forward in time by another method might be tricked into believing that they had returned home by fairies. If Creaman cosmology is correct and time is a circle, outside of which is twilight, then twilight might be used to traverse time. Some of the earliest mentions of twilight in Ars Magica state that it is an eternal realm outside the universe. Further, they list reports by magi who have travelled there of meetings with the remnants of magi who have not yet fallen into final twilight, or even have not yet been born. This clearly allows information to be passed backward through time and makes bootstrap paradoxes playable. I would suggest that in world, this is deliberate on the part of Creaman. As a separate thought, the Hall of Heroes, where ascended mortals exist, doesn't seem to be outside of time in quite the same way that Twilight is. The aspects sent by heroes into the world don't display anachronistic knowledge. So travel through the magic realm allows information to violate strict causality, which is to say, it can travel in time, but not necessarily through every and any part of the magic realm. In much the same way that there's a deep fairy where mortals do not go, perhaps there is a deep magic where twilight lies. If information can be exchanged in this way, might it be easier for characters in spiritual form to travel time? If the characters can see historical events but not interact, then they can take actionable information without creating paradoxes. Might it be simpler to send oneself through time as a ghost? Do certain prophetic dreamers do this already? Travel might be environmentally dependent in that characters can only leave and re-enter time where there is a magical aura of 10. These places are sometimes destroyed, for example, by the encroaching dominion or a transition ray. As an example, some places have an aura which rises during the equinoxes, which is why the Aegeus of the Hearth is cast on those nights. This means that although a character can go to a place via time travel, they may remain there for only a certain subjective amount of time. If you can time travel as a ghost, can you create a solid form once there? If you know the secrets of the Nightwalkers and the construction of a solid, distant body, called a phantasticum, this might allow time travel, much like the straying used by Nightwalkers, except it's somewhat safer because if you become lost in the past, you just have a lot of time in which to reorientate yourself as you come the slow way home. Fantastic travel also prevents you bringing objects back with you, save by, for example, burying them in a safe place, which makes time travel in some ways more playable. Characters can't just mine the past for physical resources. The Axis Magica creates a cynosure for spiritual travel. Is there a similar cynosure for chronal travellers? I'd argue that changes of eon should be obvious, the silencing of the oracles, for example, or the spread of the dominion. Finer levels of control probably require a law, much as geographical navigation does. As a plot idea, the characters may be the ones who construct this beacon as a saga goal. This solves the problem of why they have not seen any other time travellers. No one travels before the creation of the beacon, and afterward all bets are off, as future people can bootstrap. What can be changed is saga-dependent because cosmological arguments can be made for and against people within time having sufficient agency to change what happens. There are also questions regarding consequences. If you create paradoxes, does the universe care? Does God send an angel to edit you out of the great play of redemption? Different levels of constraint provide a different feel to the stories that they provide the players. They provide different types of challenge. I'll list some obvious options. The first is that history is set and your presence can't really change anything. All attempts to change history have, in a sense, already been attempted and have already failed. Players in these sorts of sagas need to game the historical record. They need to find loopholes in the known facts. This works well for games where the troupe do not want their characters' present day to change. The other extreme is that history is infinitely malleable at major points. Player characters can save King Arthur or prevent the fall of Constantinople, and this rewrites the world they go home to. This allows epic stories where the players get the broadest scope to redesign the world. As a third option, history could be trivially malleable. The most famous story of this type is The Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury, where the death of a butterfly in the ancient past affects the traveller's present in dramatic ways. Characters need some way of knowing the effects of their actions, what small adjustments they can make, and they need some sort of opposition. Terry Pratchett in his stories has an order of monks that go around curating tiny coincidences. As another option, history could just be unknown. If your characters go to ancient Egypt before the flood and do virtually anything, then either the narrative or the effect of the actions is lost to history. So it's not simple for them to tell if history is malleable. One way is by attempting to change a notable feature in the far future and seeing if all attempts fail due to odd circumstances. Finally, change could both happen and not happen. Time could just contain discontinuities. These are spackled over with a scab of mystical energy that forms a twilight scar in the mages. That time must be narrative and continuous may just be another human illusion.